Cool.
Fantastic. Okay.
All right. Hi there,
Awesome.
everybody. I'm Carson Grubaugh.
I'm Sean Robinson. Welcome to Living the Line. Carson, you look older.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate it. Yeah, life's been getting stressful, which is why you haven't seen so much videos from me all. But yeah, I'm really excited to come back for this pretty special episode, something that's been brewing for a long time amongst all of us, and really excited for all of the guests we've got. But we're going to be talking about distribution in comics post Diamond, and so we've got a powerhouse of new distribution here. We've got Austin English from Domino Distribution, Chris Anderson, who's doing the power of the new power distribution, Power Pulp. As long as I don't know this one comic artist that some people might know named Jim Rugg, who's also distributing with Power Pulp. And very blessed to have Jim here. And then Sean can talk a bit about like what he's experiencing through living the line distributing with three different distributors I've got written down: Crown, Diamond UK, and also Lunar. So I'm the odd one out in that I don't really know much about this, so I'm excited to learn from you guys about what distribution looks like post Diamond fucking everyone over and almost collapsing everything.
Right. If I can give a one sentence, what is distribution before we do anything else? Imagine you're the publisher and you're responsible for getting the book out there. The distributor is the person who's actually getting it into the hands of the different, sometimes consumers, sometimes, book sellers, something like that. So they are warehousing your stuff. They are, selling your actual things. And Jim, first off, thanks so much for doing this with us. I really appreciate it. And we were talking a little bit before the call that you have a pretty good framework, sort of overview of the exploded options that are out there now. Would you give us a little lay of the land?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And thank you guys for including me in this. I love talking comics, and this is a really interesting topic to me. So I'm glad that you defined it a little bit, Sean, because I think the lines between distribution, promotion, even production have started to really blur. And so I'm going to run through some of the models that I'm aware of in terms of distribution. I'll give a couple of examples of those, and then we can kind of go from there. One of the popular models right now is direct to consumers. I am currently making comics with Gary Vaynerchuk at VFriends. He is a big proponent of live sales, and this could be TikTok Live, eBay Live, whatnot.
Mm.
Whatnot did $11 billion in sales last year. Certainly not all comics, but it's a giant platform where people are buying and selling things on a large scale. In addition to that, direct to consumers might be websites, newsletters, Etsy, social media, YouTube, eBay. These are all examples where, I can list my self-published comics on eBay, for example, as buy now, sell that way. Crowdfunders are another example where that one probably blurs the line a little bit between distro, promo, and production. These are things like Kickstarter, Zoop, Patreon to some extent. I know a lot of cartoonists who distribute their work through Patreon, which is sort of like a paid subscription model that may yield other products, but essentially it's a paid subscription model. There are apps on the phone, and these include things like Webtoons, which has massive numbers. I forget what they boast, but it's something like 40 million people participate with Webtoons. Those successful titles often spin off into print. So, again, it sort of crosses over as to how these various distribution avenues intersect. But this also includes library distribution, such as Libby and Hoopla. I have both of those on my iPad and routinely read graphic novels from my library. And it's not really my library, but from, this large library resource. Print on demand, and this includes a major distributor, Ingram, with Ingram Spark. Amazon has print on demand. Rick Veitch, the great legendary
Mhm.
cartoonist Rick Veitch, has been doing his work through these print on demand offerings. Comics Wellspring is an example of this. There are tons of print on demand services. Some of them do incorporate sort of a sales retail distro component. Comics Wellspring comes to mind. I just got back from Comics Pro and had an hour-long discussion with the CEO of Comics Wellspring, and it's led me to believe now there may be several comics industries that are running parallel to each other that do not cross over at all. So we may or may not get into that further. Bookstores and comic book stores have what I would think of as a traditional model that you outlined a little bit, Sean. This is the distributor gets books from a publisher, they warehouse them, they ship them to retailers. This is Macmillan, Penguin Random House, Ingram. In comics, it used to be Diamond. Lunar is one of these. And again, that may network to bookstores, to comic book stores. It's a very traditional model, but it's still alive. I don't know if it's well, but it's still alive. And certainly many bookstores, that's how they're getting their products. Micro distributors, and I think we'll talk about some of that tonight. That includes stuff like John Porcelino's Spit and a Half, Austin's Domino Books, Chris's Power Pulp Comics. I was even talking to a comic shop recently, and they brought up Tony Shenton, who, when I
Hmm.
started doing comics 25 years ago, was selling mini comics, kind of on a consignment basis, but was going to stores and selling that. And at this point, I believe he's selling First Second or Abrams, like, higher, more
Mhm.
traditional publishers, even. That was kind of news to me, but it's still an essentially a salesman who is kind of the in between or the middleman between these publishers and comic book stores in this case. Hand selling has always been a part of comics as long as I've been here. That is festivals, shows, conventions. And I would include for anybody watching this that's, maybe self-publishing and wants to sell books, I include things like arts and craft shows, literary fairs. Local events are a really good place to actually do this, and you may connect with local bookstores or local booksellers or comic book vendors by doing these events. Um, so that's kind of my overview of just off the top of my head before we hopped on this call. But I think it illustrates just how many options are out there right now. And I am doing a book right now with Stephen Bissett. It is Tyrant. It's a collection of Tyrant, a book that he self-published in the mid 90s. And the reason that's relevant to this conversation is in the mid 90s, there were about 18 comic book distributors. They all followed more or less the same model where you'd list your comic book, they would take orders, they would fulfill those orders to the comic shops. When there were so many distributors, these guys could self-publish and get a little bit of income and sort of spread their books all around the comics industry effectively and make a living. For various reasons, all those comic distributors collapsed in the 90s, and Diamond was what was left. It was a bit of a monopoly, and that left a lot of self-publishers out of business or afraid of going out of business. Some of them quit altogether. That's what Steve Bissett did with Tyrant. Some of them went to Image Comics as like a cover of what was going on. The sky was falling, really, at least as the way the system had been in the 80s and 90s. And this included Jeff Smith's Bone, one of the biggest comics phenoms, graphic novels in American comics history. Even that went to Image for a couple of years because once those distributors went away, it was much more difficult for everybody to be able to make a living in comics. And I bring that up now because I feel like we legitimately have 25 viable methods of distribution now. They're not going to work for everybody. If you're a big publisher, probably you don't want to pack your orders yourself and, try to sell individually. But for a lot of people, several of these options may make a lot of sense. And I think it's going to be a bigger discussion going forward. There's so much information on craft of comics, how to actually make comics. I feel like a comic is not done until somebody reads it. And in order to do that, you need the distribution part. I feel like that's a part of how to make comics, in 2026.
Yeah.
That- It's a fantastic overview, Jim, and I think you're really getting to some of the differences between the if you think about any given book having multiple universes of potential audiences, right? And then the full potential audience for this book is some fraction of all the human beings that are alive. Then each of these different outlets enables you to theoretically reach a different one of those audiences. There's the audience that really wants your book, but is a shut-in and doesn't ever want to go to the grocery store or leave the house, right? And then there's the potential audience for your book who only loves the local comic shop and is going to be a diehard to that place until the owner is no longer with us, right? And then there's the person who only wants to shop at the local weirdo bookstore where they're really nice to him, and he has political meetings in the back room, right? That you have like all these different like collections of potential audiences, and the dream is that you are reaching all of them, right? And then the dream originally, for me anyway, was like, Diamond did all of this stuff for me. Like, that's my perspective on things. Like when the years that we were with Diamond and things were functioning, it was like I prepped a book and then I pushed the book machine, and all of these things just happened, right? We sold. I can talk sales numbers. I think I pushed the book machine back in March of last year, and the next thing I know, we sold 4,000 copies of Mansect. Like they just went out to people who were excited about it. And then, kind of post Diamond now, when you're in this sort of uncertain world, I spent a month packing 700 boxes uh,
Mm.
the past month. And so I'm kind of getting the reality of that different sort of world, collapsed worldview. Um, but I mean, Austin and Chris, both you guys are sort of ground level in that sense, right? Because you are sort of standing in for the cartoonist who is able to make the fantastic work, but doesn't necessarily have the, you know, uh, whatever craziness it takes to pack 700 boxes. Um, so,
Okay,
are
can
there?
I ask, when you say that you're packing those 700 boxes, is that because you're sending 700 boxes to all of the all the the people that are making up like existing in Diamond's Way, or are you sending directly to customers?
Yeah, this is an experiment in making a book that only goes out to direct to consumer. And so,
Okay.
being a pornographic book, that made more sense than other books in that sense, because you're not having to sort of trip over all of the different nannies that are in the way of,
Right.
in the way otherwise. Yeah. So direct to consumer. Yeah. Um, but I mean, Austin, is there like, so, as the head of Domino, is there like an exemplar cartoonist of the like sort of Domino, like this person is getting distributed because I am distributing their stuff, but they're fantastic. Is there?
Well, I mean, I think Jim's overview brought up a lot of stuff for me, and I do think most of the people I try to focus on with Domino, the work that we stock in the store, we have two. There's two things that I do. There's a basically a web store that has 400 different books, maybe around 500. It depends. And I sell those directly to people that visit the web store as they would a comic book store. But what I've been trying to do in the last few years is create a separate wing of Domino that sells very similar to, I think, what, as I understand it, what Power Pulp is doing, as a, a wing of Domino that sells back to comic book stores. Now, for the web store, I'll buy mini comics from a mini comic artist at 50% of what they're selling. What I've been trying to do with the wing of Domino that sells back to bookstores and comic book stores is try to find the primary problem that I find is for the web store, I can buy 10 copies, 20 copies from someone making a mini comic that I find really beautiful. Selling back to stores, I want to buy from people in a greater bulk. I want to buy at least 30 copies, maybe 50 copies of something to sell back. It's very tiny, but for self-published mini comics, that's where I'm starting off to try to do a Diamond Junior, 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 Junior. And what I found, the immediate problem I found with my people, for my world, is a lot of people don't even print 50 copies of they print 30 copies. And what I'm trying to do is there are people out there that I'll sell, maybe 300 copies of their mini comic over the year. And for selling back to bookstores, I want people who I think, like, okay, if you want an example of a name, I'd say, like, there's a cartoonist named Walker Tate. He just had a book from FU. Over the years, when I plug his stuff into the Domino web store, I try to get maybe 20 copies of each of his mini comics, and they sell out. But he prints a small amount. So part of what I want to do with selling back to bookstores with something like that is to get him to print more copies so that I can buy stuff at maybe slightly under 50%, maybe 35 to 40%. And he's printing enough that if I'm doing that, like maybe I'm buying 50 from him for selling back to bookstores. But the goal is to maybe get to, I'm buying hundreds of copies from him at that lower rate. But for my people, the mini comic people, online distribution to me is it's what works for people. Showing a comic on Instagram, saying, "Hey, go buy it from my web store." I feel like a way to really grow an audience is going to, and I think Jim said accurately. I hope that bookstores and comic book stores survive. You know, I really I feel like they don't. no matter what, we're going to be in a tough spot because bookstores have this thing where, and this is how I've always used them. I go in, I'm looking for a specific book, but there's all this stuff I've never heard of, and I can visually look through it, and I will become a, I think I would go into my comic book store and I'd be looking for one thing, and then I find Jim Woodring's work without knowing about it, without being part of his online network. And finding it through a bookstore, that's the way that I think, if we compare now to the 90s, no matter what was happening, people had larger audiences from people discovering their work through the bookstore model. So for my people, mini comic people, people that print, maybe at most 150 copies of their work, I want, I want to see a future where that kind of work can exist in bookstores and comic book stores because that's how people are going to find it by chance. And one person finding it by chance, 100 people finding it by chance, that's the only way, especially for maybe older cartoonists, not people that maybe aren't native to the internet, maybe don't go to festivals. I think the way and don't use the internet in the way that a very plugged in younger person might use it. I feel like there has to be a distribution model with bookstores in mind that kind of looks beyond, might be based on the internet. Maybe people are doing the ordering in the internet, but the buying of the books happens in real life, and the discovery of another cartoonist happens in a real place. And the, the the scary part is whether bookstores can pay rents, whether this current moment in time allows for bookstores to exist. I think it's probably harder than ever before. But there's all these, there's a beautifully used bookstore down the block from me called Human Relations in Brooklyn. There's tons of people that come in there and they carry comics and zines. And when I drop off comics and zines there, people buy them and I post off them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's one example. And they're not a comic book store. They never had a diamond account, but they have a beautiful comics section. We love comics. So there's a gazillion of off the diamond grid examples of stores like that, that if we can focus getting strange and offbeat material into those places, that's how I see more people reading this stuff rather than, and this is what I do currently, just hitting our online social media ways of promoting over and over and over again to the same audience that, our audience online expands, but I don't know if it can expand forever, and I do think the bookstore model is the way to communicate this stuff to people. If that makes any sense.
It does.
And then I'm curious, Chris, because Power Pulp, at least in my experience, is like Instagram promotion, 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 and it's a lot of the artists I'm familiar with because of most of how I've sought out and got comics over the last 5 years that we're doing this channel is I just stroll Instagram constantly for new stuff. So I'm kind of doing on Instagram what Austin is explaining in a bookstore. I'm trying to find that new thing, and I've often longed for an online comic book store where I can kind of just go browse where any creator could just link to their store envy or something, and I wouldn't have to worry about the algorithm machine. But it seems like you guys are kind of starting with the social media promotion and moving from there out. Is that correct with the Power Pulp?
Yeah, a little bit. Austin's story kind of parallels ours and crosses our story in a lot of different ways, actually, because the impetus for Power Pulp was actually we started talking about this before the Diamond collapse, and it was that as individual creators, as self-publishers, the only way that you could sell your books was, through a crowdfunding thing or on Instagram or different platforms like that, or hand selling it to shops. And when you walk into a shop, Austin was kind of saying this too, is you see, if you see a book on the shelf, it looks interesting. You might not pick it up, but the second time you go to a shop, you see it again now.
Yeah.
it draws you to it. If it's drawn your eye twice, you want to pick it up. And as a self-publisher trying to get those books into shops was, you had to go and hand sell them to everybody. And so the idea was sort of when Diamond was still working was that we would kind of come together under an umbrella, and act as a fake publisher, so to
Mm,
speak, even though we're all our own separate businesses, uh, to be able to get into Diamond because they wouldn't have taken you if you were just a single creator. You had to,
yeah.
be putting things out consistently from different creators. They sort of there was a wall up there. And as we were forming this, Diamond collapsed, and so we just kind of said, well, what if we try to do this ourselves? And so we're all, individual creators. The margins are so small, at best we can probably print 2,000 books, but then you got to store them in your house. So, it gets pretty tough like that. And so trying to bring the cost down as much as possible, it's tough. You can't compete with Marvel and DC and things like that. So, we really just sort of tried to come together as a collective, and we're constantly brainstorming and coming up with different ways. The marketing is just sort of guerrilla marketing that we do, and we are constantly reaching out to shops and just trying to get them to sign on, where we're able to all offer 50% off for retailers and free shipping over $200. And then we also sell to individuals, where there's shop deserts. Anybody can order books from us, and the $200, free shipping applies. And so we kind of have all come together and, you know, promote each other. So it's just sort of happening naturally. But as we go, as things get tighter, it's sort of forming into this like super Voltron of independent creators. Whereas before, you really could only find us and our books at conventions. And there's plenty of comic fans that can't get to conventions, don't have never been to a convention, but
Yeah.
some of the books that people are putting out are amazing, and so we're just trying to get that out into the world and into shops, and to Austin's point again, into places you wouldn't expect to find comics, and record stores and head shops and all the different oddity places out there, and kind of expand people's um, idea of what comics are, where they can be found, and things like that.
Are you guys still each creators shipping them out themselves there, or you got some centralized
That's
distribution?
right. That's the part that I forgot to mention is yes, we have centralized distribution, and everybody in the collective sort of does a little bit to help, run the whole thing. So all the creators are actually part of the company. We have centralized distribution in Iowa. James and John Coates, two of the other founders, along with
Hmm.
me, they do all of the sending out of the product and stuff like that. And we wanted to initially not take any money whatsoever from our creators and give it all to them, but it became pretty clear pretty quickly that this thing was going to have to expand, and there was going to be a lot more operational costs than we anticipated. So we started now taking 10% off of just individual sales, in
Good.
anticipation of us having to maybe hire an employee in the future, or to send things out, or having to expand our space.
Yeah,
You
good
mean
for
to,
you. I talked to the Coates brothers, like I think the week that you guys announced that, and they were talking to me about the terms, and I just wrote back to them and I said, you know, we could maybe do something together, but you have to take some money.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, 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 yeah.
you, you're gonna, this is real, guys. Like this is real labor. You gotta take 10% at the very
Yeah.
minimum.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely couldn't. We couldn't, and we still at this point couldn't take on like small publishers, like entire lines of books. It had to be just individual creators. And at some point that might change, but right now we're still kind of doing that. And it's only been like 7 months, and it's grown so much already.
Well, the
Yeah.
thing that's very bracing about both your model and I kind of see Domino as the '90s Fantagraphics to the Power Pulp Image Comics, or no, Mirage, I would say.
Right,
You know, you
right.
Yeah, exactly. You guys are Mirage. Sorry, I said the I word. That's sort of the framing that I see. But the thing that's really bracing about it for me is that we live in such a weird time where the tools of making comics have never been more accessible. The information, thanks to people like Jim, about how pros from any period of time made their comics is more accessible than it ever was before. I was dying for this information when I was 16, 17 years old, and then discovering copies of Cerebus where Dave Sim is laying down the how to, in a couple paragraphs, and it's like dripping information out. On the other hand, it is never been a worse time to try to make your living as a freelance artist of any stripe. I would imagine, and so the sort of disparate, there's an unbridgeable chasm between those two facts. But I mean, I think that you guys are filling that void in a certain respect because somebody who has a certain amount of that hustle has an amazing product, and doesn't have the ability to sort of get it to the people who are the natural audience for it. Needs people like you guys. Jim, what's your sort of, seems like you feel like it's opening up right now. When did this start, do you think?
It probably starts with the internet, quite frankly, because that's both the information exchange where you can now find out, hey, where did you print this book that I liked? It's becomes much easier to track down other creators or small publishers or whatever. And there was a shift, like when the internet shows up, it's kind of like, oh, information is free. And when I was coming up, people would be like, don't tell your idea to anybody because someone will steal it, and it was kind of like a lot of people had the mentality of it was a close guarded secret, whatever knowledge they had. I think the internet shifted that kind of as socially, and then it was just a matter of like, go digging, go research, go ask people that did something that you want to do. You could now track them down and ask them. At some point it shifts to now people are just volunteering the information. So I think that's when I saw the shift happen. I'm sure there was some DIY, sharing before that, certainly, but it becomes just more and more accessible when the internet shows up. And I know social media is kind of a bad word, and I don't totally disagree with that, but it is a lot of information sharing, or at least it was for a while. Now it's a lot of advertising, I suppose. But that information is out there in a way. Sean, I had the same experience as you. I was desperate for this stuff. Sometimes I'm jealous of these younger kids who, if I were 13 now, I would consume all of these artists that I was told this is who you should study. I would be able to, make my comics and print them on demand instead of having to offset print them. So, the information and the technology are both more available now than they've ever been. I mean, in some ways, I disagree with your assessment that it's not a great time to be an individual, freelance artist or self-publisher. I actually think it's probably better than it's ever been. It's not easy. I don't want to give anybody the misconception that it's easy, but, you know, I've actually started to have the conversation with artists about like, when I was coming up, it was what kind of pen do you use? What kind of paper are you drawing on? And in the last 3 weeks, I've had conversations with artists, and it is about fine tuning yourself. Like you are the tool, you're the instrument. And with that comes the acknowledgement that some people really aren't built for this whole entire process. The nice thing is, we do have these different versions. I think the difference between Domino and Power Pulp is striking. If I'm an artist who maybe really doesn't want to do self promotion or doesn't want to go out in public and go to these trade shows and things, Austin is amazing. Like that would be a great resource to have if you're just a really gifted cartoonist, but you're not quite up to the task of the business side, the promotional side. I say there's three pillars for an independent artist, and that is obviously craft, which everybody loves. Learn to make the best comics you can, learn to draw, write, all that stuff. The other two are promotion or audience building and business. And a lot of artists, they could probably learn it. I don't know. Maybe some of them can't. But for whatever reason, some people just don't really, that's going to be a problem for them. And the nice thing is there are some different models. Chris talking about Power Pulp, some of the stuff he didn't mention is all the things that have come out already that were sort of unintended consequences. It's that classic you can break a twig, right? But if you put 50 twigs together, it becomes impossible to break. We have a lot of that with Power Pulp. Everybody was self-publishing, and that meant they were promoting themselves, they were doing production themselves, they were doing their distribution themselves. So now you kind of do have 50 people rowing in the same direction, more or less, and we don't all have to agree on everything. We don't all have to promote everybody's books, but it also takes a long time to produce this stuff. And if you're a consumer, you want new. So by joining together, guess what? I might not have a new book for 9 months, but in that time, the other Power Pulp members might produce 25 books. So there is that constant reason for people to keep coming back, for new people to be coming. And we're building things like our own PR machine just from the list that we share with each other, from, people doing the work themselves. And I feel like all of that, like I'm eager to do a new book through Power Pulp just to try to take advantage of like what's it look like now with 40 members. I think there were, I don't know, a dozen of us or something whenever I joined up. So I'm very eager to see like how some of that stuff plays out. And you guys dismissed Image. Image is who I would equate us to in a lot of ways because, sometimes we get on group calls and definitely people have different ideas about what we're doing, and that's okay. It gives us a better chance as well for something to actually break out, whether that is a book or that's some sort of promotional idea, or maybe it's even a new distribution avenue that shows up. In any event, by having, 40 or 50 people doing this, it really increases our odds that we're going to hit that. I hate to say this, but like a viral something.
Yeah.
So, I think there's a lot of ways that this is beneficial. I think it's experimental. I'm super excited. Like I think about where is it going to be in 5 years because it will look completely
Right.
different than it does now. It's not even 1 year.
So
Yeah.
I wanted to defend myself real quick. I was not dismissing Image. I was dismissing me and Carson accidentally talking about Image because the last time we did it, I think we had a 20-minute discussion about which of the Image founders could beat each other in a fight, and we were
That's my
Well,
kind of comics talk there.
I was
Carson said
It's
Silvestri,
got to be
and
Valentino.
I ended with McFarlane. Valentino, that's a bold one there.
How
he's got the
You don't
Snazzy.
streak.
suspect him.
He's a little
But we've all
streak,
seen
but
we've seen Todd take his shirt off in front of Peter David, and that was ages ago, but he was looking okay. So I mean, it's
See,
I
this is
just
what I was talking about, Jim.
yeah, but Sylvester's like 8'8". Like, how are you gonna fuck with that guy? He's huge.
okay, right.
But anyways, to me, the comparison to Image is actually what Jim said, is that everyone in Power Pulp was a businessman and a promoter and an artist before they hit Power Pulp. I I don't think all those Image guys were necessarily doing it, but what made Image phenomenal is those original founders were all turned out to be great businessmen as well.
Right.
And bringing that energy to Power Pulp, I do see that Power Pulp similar to Image in that the content tends to be more action oriented and things like that. Like people like the Coates brothers. I mean, like their stuff is just super fun, super action, but they have that extra component to it, which is rare for artists, honestly. Jim's correct about that.
Well, what
Well, I
Chad
think that
BU. Oh, uh, sorry, Chad is the another example of somebody who's just a fantastic business person. He's a fantastic hand
Yeah.
seller. If you go and you talk to Chad, and you don't have copies of the re-up when you leave his table, something has gone wrong.
Yeah, and you should be buying it. It's a
Right.
great book.
right.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is back at, it wasn't that long ago that if you wanted to be a comic book creator, your choices were basically to work for Marvel or DC. And if that was the case, then you were going and it was a job, and all the only thing that you had to do was show up and draw your pages, and that was it. Everything else was taken care of for you. And now it has changed so much that even if you're doing a book for Dark Horse or especially Image for sure, you have to be the promotion, the carnival barker for your book to get it out there and get it sold, and it's just part of the job now. And with the way that everything is going now, you need to run a fantastic Instagram. You need to probably have some sort of presence on YouTube. You've got to become an entertainer of different stripes just to get your comic out there. And So with Power Pulp, what is also great is that it alleviates a little bit of that. So you don't have to do as much of it because somebody else is probably also, doing those same things too, which is very nice. I'll
Well,
say.
also for a reader, for like a reader to, if every individual interesting comic artist right now is they're all self-promoting their work
Hmm.
to all the available readers, that just can't. It's no one can process that much. I mean, again, just walking into a bookstore, there's more artists in that bookstore than the amount of artists I follow and am interested in on social media. But it still works. I will ask just if I have time to walk around the bookstore and if I have time to look at stuff I haven't looked at before, I would look at more work seriously than if I was following each of those artists on social media. And I think what you say is very true in another way where this festival model, which is how most, I think, people of my generation from indie comics and self-publishing or experimental kind of comics, they really rely on that festival model. And I think it's because for a certain generation of cartoonists, the kind of work they make has never been um, able to be carried by Diamond. Even work that I think would be commercial, it just doesn't. It doesn't fit. It's a periodical. It was during the phase where Diamond wasn't going to carry a periodical. It didn't hit a certain minimum. So this idea of maybe someone making at best an $8 mini comic that costs them, I don't know, let's say $2 to produce. They're getting on a plane, they're renting table space, if they're lucky, they're staying with friends, but maybe they're getting a hotel, you don't have a kitchen, you're making food. There's just no way. And there's cartoonists who I love who do the circuit. They go to every festival they can. And yeah, they're definitely getting some of their work out there, but in terms of just the basic like having enough funds from that self-made tour to fund the next issue. Let's forget like funding rent and food and putting money away for your family. Like just using that to like fund the next issue. That is an almost impossible model to make
Right.
work. I mean, it does for some people, but it definitely takes time away from making the work. And so I think something like it's to me that whole festival model really is it's fun and it's I've made so many real close friendships on like going to festivals, and it's for me I think something that I love doing for the fun of it. But I think it being there being as many festivals as they are to me shows a failure of distribution for the kind of people that I am interested in working with. And I think one of the other things that what you said brought up is that let's say maybe I'm in a town that I haven't been to before and it's got a small comic shop. The worst feeling is when you go into a comic shop and it's just a Diamond outlet store. Like all their product is from Diamond. And I like the idea of a store that's, and as Jim said, we don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. I think these are just, and I love incremental change. I think that's the only way things happen, and that incremental change is exciting to me. So in 5 years, like a store that maybe orders from Power Pulp, orders from Domino, orders from whatever other distributors pop up and are able to plug themselves into stores. That if we can get away from there just being these diamond outlet shops, and you go into a random store and you're like, I really don't know what this specific store, what this regional store is going to be interested in. That I mean, I worked at Forbidden Planet for years, and people would come in for New Comic Day on Wednesday, and I was doing ordering for the mini comic section, and I was doing ordering for Tony Shen. But the nice thing was when we really got that going a lot, you'd see regulars coming in on every day because they're like, I don't know who dropped off mini comics today off the street that they bought comic stuff. There's new comics every day. It's not just Wednesday. And then those people coming in to get those mini comics, okay, maybe that section, the real estate of the store, isn't generating as much money as the Funko Pop section, but someone's coming in on Saturday instead of they're coming in on Wednesday and they're coming in on Saturday, and they're going to pick up some Diamond books while they're there on Saturday. So
Right.
there's something about this kind of work operating outside of those structures that can benefit those more corporate structures and can I don't know, I think just alleviate some of the stagnant nature that you see when Diamond was really dominant.
Well, okay, so if I can push back on everybody really quickly, I just want to make sure that I'm dogpiling everybody simultaneously. Jim, I think that one of the reasons that your viewpoint is what it is because you have tremendous abilities in all three of those areas that you're identifying as the three pillars. And I think that it's easy to take for granted the abilities that you personally have in spades or have cultivated over time. And frankly, because I have the weird position of having been the depressed cartoonist who could barely get out of my house and was not going to show any my stuff to anybody and could not write a promo email or anything to save my life, and then had to be that person for other people and found that it was very easy for me in the other context. I feel like I can kind of see how difficult it is for somebody who is inwardly drawn to have to develop an outward persona that is at odds with the work that they're making. Discuss.
You know what? I agree totally, Sean. And I don't mean to imply everybody should, that whatever I've done is how people should do it. Um, I know exactly what you're saying. Some of my favorite cartoonists I know would, I've seen them have these almost anxiety attacks at a show, where it's like, oh, suddenly I'm going to be out in public and have to do this. So, like I said, I do think there are different models. And, in that case, I would say that's a better fit with Domino than with Power Pulp. And, I'm happy that that exists, before, and there are different versions of this. Like Koyama Press, I can remember, she was really an advocate for her artists. And I realized not every artist is going to be fortunate enough to fit Domino or to fit Koyama or to find somebody who is kind of like that patron saint of, taking some of the business or some of the promo off of their shoulders. I understand that and I sympathize. Um, and I tried to acknowledge that earlier too. This is not easy, it's really not, but I do think there are more models now than there used to be. So hopefully it allows more artists to kind of find a way to do this. And it's not perfect, it may never be perfect, but I do think there are more opportunities than there used to be, and there are more models than there used to be. So hopefully we are serving, more and more different types of artists than we used to do. Certainly in the 90s or even in the aughts, I think it was much more limited than it is now.
Yeah.
I
No.
see
Sean,
people on Webtoons, for instance, right? There's no barrier to entry on Webtoons. And I've known students and different cartoonists on there where they have pseudonyms. They're really not comfortable being, uh, you know, visible at all. And in some ways, you can go on Webtoons, you can create a whole different identity. And I know plenty of cartoonists that have done that. So again, I just think these tools are improving in terms of sort of the breadth of what they can offer different types of artists. So hopefully, artists are able to find those different models and find something that allows them an outlet.
yeah, Sean, before you dogpile on Chris and Austin, I would like to stick with what Jim was saying because while he was talking about that, what I was hearing the most is when he said that when I had conversations with people, it used to be all tool talk stuff. Now enough of that is out there that the conversations are towards management of the self, and that might be something, I'll throw that out there, that's something that we should all take as a responsibility to make some videos about that and put that out there because I am also a person who I don't ever want to be seen. And I learned all of these skills through the channel, through promoting Strange Death and things like that, and feel like it is a skill you can build, it is a skill you can become competent at. And that goes to psychological health with cartoonists as well, which is tremendously important because we are an isolate. And I deal with this, I think, I don't know about Chris, but Austin, Jim, Sean, you all teach as well. So we're constantly in touch with young people who are facing this problem. And my biggest thing as an instructor right now, especially post AI, is technique and all that stuff is way less important than teaching citizens and teaching people how to be a self again. and especially for artists because we are very vulnerable in that. And that is when we talk about tool talk, Jim, you're exactly right. We are our tool. And yeah, we should be opening that conversation, those of us who have gone through it, whether they be, I don't know, Jim, if you developed it or if it was natural to you, but either way, that's no one was writing that in Wizard magazine, right? We were reading Bart Sears, but Bart Sears and Greg Capullo, they were giving us composition and anatomy. We're past that now as a society. So that's a really important point Jim made.
But I
Early
oh
on,
yes.
let me just finish this because it's what I started to say early on. I remember Bill Bushell, someone I consider a mentor, explaining to me how distribution changes led to Love and Rockets, right? Once we didn't
Hmm.
have to sell to the lowest or the broadest audience on the newsstand and, double print your print runs and sell half of them, whenever the distro model shifted to the direct market and we had advanced orders, now you could be more specialized. And I feel like the distro model has changed again. And just having this conversation tonight, it makes me think that health, the psychology of this, that may be the big ramification of the current shift in distribution that we've been experiencing really for the last 15 or 20 years. But it's a massive shift in distribution, the way the direct market was a massive shift in the 80s from the newsstand. And I've been wondering, like, what is the ramifications of that? And I wonder if that is the answer, Carson, if it is a matter of artists maybe being able to be a little bit more healthy and still engage with this.
Yeah.
Can I interject one thing? It's, I think some people might listen to this and say, well, what are you guys talking about? Capital City collapsed, Diamond became the monopoly, and then that was not good for maybe 11 Rockets. That like the Hernandez brothers had access to the direct market, but really, the Hernandez brothers are supposed to be in bookstores. They should have their work on the shelves next to Nabokov or something like that. And you know what? That happened. So the battle of distribution is over. We have the bookstore market. And I feel one thing that I've observed is, and I would have been one of those people that would have said, I love comic book stores, but I don't know if this is going to be the place that a bookish person is going to find Julie Doucet. Like, I don't, but now that you can get Julie Doucet's last, like, Times on J that she put out 4 years ago, okay, that was distributed to bookstores. But I think what I observed is, wow, the comic weirdo freaks like myself who read genre comics, but then at some point wade into the other area of the store. I never would have thought this would have been true until bookstore line opened up. But it's like those people are more aligned to take a chance on Julie Doucet than the bookstore market. I mean, it just seems like we all like the distribution argument for years. It seemed, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed like we got to get into bookstores. We got to get into bookstores. And it's like, okay, that happened. But for I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but for my conception of like the most interesting, creative, forward-thinking comics, the bookstore market does not seem to, it doesn't seem to be, and certain people, I think people that built up a huge reputation in the 90s through that direct market system. I'd say some of the best cartoonists like Klaus and the Hernandez brothers, they have a presence there. And because of that, because people know their work from that great distribution period in the 90s, great, and not great in other ways, but they have a presence there. But whoever is the equivalent of Hernandez brothers now
Yeah.
is going to, for some reason, what they make is going to be too strange for the bookstore market. And it's almost like, okay, now they have, now whoever is the progressive version of the Hernandez brothers now is likely going to self-publish. Maybe they'll be a pretty successful self-publisher, but even a successful self-publisher is going to have a much lower print run than the Hernandez brothers did in the 90s. And so to me, it's almost kind of like astounding that the bookstore market opened up, but the best of the best comics seem to be still in a kind of shrinking terrain. And I might be completely off, but that's something I seem to observe. I don't know how it's anecdotal, but I don't know what you like. I don't know if like the minimum again that minimum of like putting out a book, a self-publisher putting out a book prior to Capital City's collapse. and saying, okay, well, I have enough readers here to, to print 2,000 copies of the next issue or more. I might not have much money after that, but I can keep doing this. This is self-sustaining. Whereas now it seems like the equivalent of, I mean, maybe the equivalent of someone doing Tyrant now, if they didn't hook up with the YA publisher and say, this is a story about dinosaurs and it's people and it's beautifully drawn, people will understand this. Maybe someone who is as good as Bichette but not doing something in line with that, instead of having self-publishers that they can keep sustaining, they might be self-publishing in the 200 copies run, and so that seems like a strange and unanticipated step back with this whole other market being opened up.
So, if I can take a quick stab at that, I would say you got multiple factors, but one is that bookstores are afraid of things that are transgressive, and reviewers are afraid of things that are transgressive. And when you do certain kinds of, whether content-wise or format-wise, you do something that's transgressive, it's just not as welcome as it would be otherwise. I would also say that huge percentage of people in the bookstore market, I hope they're not listening right now, are visually illiterate.
Yes.
And so when a person, I'm not trying to be too specific here, when one of those people is reading the comic book that you are holding up as an exemplar, they are reading the words and then they are tracking their eyes to the next word balloon, and then they're reading it closer to like what a prose novel is. That's my theory anyway, based on certain kinds of reviews and evaluations I've had of certain kinds of books where the effect of the book itself is purely visual or part of the mechanics of the structure of the pages. That's my stab at your.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll take a shot.
Yeah.
I'll take a shot at this, Austin. So I think other models have emerged to, for specifically what you're describing, like a self-publisher who makes enough money to then, finance their next issue. One of those models is obviously Kickstarter, and this happens from small publishers or self-publishers or growing publishers like an Iron Circus, all the way down to self-publishers, cartoonists who they will kickstart every book. They're successful, and it allows them to continue to just produce books. That exists, and we can point at people that do that. That's a real thing. The other one that I was introduced to this week was Comics Wellspring told me a story about somebody who showed up 7 years ago, printed 25 copies of their first book, has continued to produce work. They now publish over 400 titles, and they do print runs of 10,000 plus. And this is a print-on-demand company that has sort of a retail component built in, and that completely circumvents bookstore distribution, comic book store distribution. But it's a model that you can build now. And I'm sure they're active on social media in order to promote that and to grow their audience. But they're totally different avenues. And those are two examples that exist within the current distribution model. It's not the same. I love comic book stores. It's not the same as when I got to finally get to comic book stores that had like the books I liked and I could have conversations with people in the store. I love that community, and I realize this is really different. But at the same time, everything is different now. And I do think there are models that are somewhat the equivalent of a self-publisher in the 90s that was able to, maybe through Capital City and some of the other distributors, put together enough money to sustain a small self-published title. I think there are ways to do that now. They are different, but I think that there are a number of those ways now.
And actually, if I can just respond, it probably speaks to a real health of the medium in that what you're describing is probably artists that I'm completely unaware of, and artists who work in a way that is just not in my sphere of vision. And I think maybe some of the frustration that maybe a lot of us feel is, oh, I've been following this certain trajectory of cartooning my whole life. This is what should be connecting with people, we've fought in the wars of we fought the alternative comics wars. Okay, like it should be these artists that are following in that tradition, they should be connecting with bookstore readers because that's what we always thought. But what you're saying, there's what you're describing is probably cartoonists that I'm unaware of that are bridging that gap in a way that's just off my radar. But that's what a healthy medium should be. There should be all kinds of things happening that and people that are steeped in this stuff just don't, it's outside of their orthodox belief in things.
Well, if I can also give an actual concrete example of somebody that I have, I'm only a couple degrees removed from Simon Roy, who was the artist on the Prophet reboot in the early 2010s. He was the primary artist on that. He is currently working with Crown, who is my new distributor. He has been doing basically. Crown started off as a fulfillment house, and they would fulfill Kickstarters for people who were in the Portland area. And then they started fulfilling Kickstarters for other places that wanted to do it. And basically, somebody like Simon, who has the network, has the hustle, has the obviously art and writing chops, but isn't going to be his own, private mailman, can hire them to do the fulfillment aspects of things, and they'll do the print broker aspect of it, and they'll manufacture things within the house and things like that. And it's an interesting move for them to start doing distribution, which we're one of the I think the only publisher that started off with them. They do a bunch of game companies as well, Goodman Games and Pegamoose and a couple other places. But it's an easy move for them to move into distribution, because basically, as Jim is alluding to here, if you can fulfill a Kickstarter with 1,000 boxes, how much easier or harder is it to send a big box to Ingram instead, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been an interesting experiment because we've sort of been their guinea pig in a lot of different ways. But the thing that really sold me on them is that they hired Terry Hellman from Diamond Book Distribution, a really great guy and also a really smart guy, type of guy who can just look at like a sales trend and tell you how many copies you need to print. And they hired him, and it was interesting because I just kind of got I could see the way that they were just willing to just build the thing that they had, and it kind of collapses when you realize, like, oh hey, this place is a fulfillment house. Oh hey, this place can manufacture stuff in house. Oh hey, this place is a distributor now. It kind of collapses some of those definitions a little bit in the same way that Jim was talking about at the beginning of the conversation.
Sean shut it down. I think,
No, it's just processing.
Yeah, I'm just thinking too. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's all of this is about just trying to make a healthier industry for all of us, and one component is you have to find your audience, and then the second component is that you have to get your books to that audience, and distribution, physical distribution is just, you know, one element of all of those things. And just the way that this conversation has been going, it's really been turning my wheels on a lot of different things. I think Jim brought up these points before too, that there are so many different ways that you can get the work out now, to where, Austin was saying that the about how the numbers of print runs have gone down so much. And I think from previous generations, or whatever you want to call it. But I think that we're in a spot now where we're at least I believe that we're in a position where we can talk to different audiences and to retailers, and to kind of, I hate to use the word train because it sounds like you're talking to a dog or something, but for lack of a better word, train them on how to talk to their customers about what they might be interested in, and show them things that, if all they buy is Batman, well then, check it out. Power Pulp has some books that are, slightly adjacent to that. And once they get into that and they sort of realize that, oh, this may be even better than Batman, and it's a little more artsy. The art is interesting, and so if you're into that, well, check this out. And eventually, it leads you all the way to it could potentially, if we're showing the audience the path, it could lead them to all sorts of comics that are out there. And in that way, we grow the audience as a whole and makes the entire industry healthy. So, the breaking down of Diamond in some ways may just be the catalyst that makes this industry as healthy or even healthier than it was, in the late 80s and beyond, it's just going to take the people who are thinking about it and the doers like all of us to help each other and try to expand this and think about it all the time and express our thoughts and do the work. And I think that we really can make a extremely healthy industry as opposed to this thing that kind of feels like it's been dying on the vine for a few years now, and it can really go the other way if we just do the work.
I think that's such a good thing to say because I think one of the features of comics history for over 100 years is that comics lets itself get pushed around by concerns with money, by almost it's one of the most vulnerable mediums we could probably spend ages figuring out what that is. But in this moment with time receding, I think one of the key things is not letting some equally wrong-headed, corporate concern bulldoze and just extract whatever's left. Like if comic book stores are in a vulnerable position, some sort of distribution model that equals what Diamond does and is equally predatory, or whatever. That's such a potential because it's such a vulnerable industry. But I think one of the things that I think retailers are better than this with publishers, but I think publishers underestimate what their audience and readers are capable of. And I think a lot of people here have worked in a comic book store or are close to comic book store retailers. And I think one thing you learn working in a store is a lot of your assumptions about what readers will accept and what an audience distribution can reach is so wrong. And that, when I worked at Forbidden Planet, there'd be people that would come in, buy the new Wednesday books, and then they'd also buy the most challenging, graphic novel possible. And they wouldn't be saying, I don't know about this. I like this. I like the superhero stuff, but I don't like this. They would be receptive. It would just be a natural thing. It would happen all the time. And one thing I notice is when I teach students, I show them Jaime Hernandez comics, and I also show them Anke Fuchtenberger comics. And Anke Fuchtenberger is a super experimental European cartoonist. The name for graphic novel makes it seem very off-putting. It's called W the Horror, so it's almost like a parody of what an experimental graphic novel would be. But when I show Hernandez next to Anke Fuchtenberger, I think in our milieu, we think, okay, Jaime Hernandez, that's perfect storytelling. That's the most comprehensive, like any intelligent reader, that's the kind of storytelling that they're receptive to. This other stuff, I don't know, that's too outside the norm. Even an intelligent reader is going to be repelled by this. But when I show that work side by side to students, I often find that the Anke Fuchtenberger work, they're more receptive to it, or they follow it a bit more. And I think there is in comics especially, there's such an untapped readership of people that have much broader tastes and much more adventurous tastes than we think they do. I mean, the depressing thing is you go on Goodreads and there's a slightly experimental graphic novel and all the responses are, I don't know what is this. So there's the fear that people won't accept those kinds of things. But I think there really are people that go to stores that are there's so many more adventurous readers and younger people entering into their life with reading comics or making comics that are not as sensitive to quote unquote difficult material as we think they are. And if we keep, I was making this silly analogy, it's like I almost feel like lit comics or art comics, whatever you want to call them. It's almost like we're in this phase where like if jazz stayed bebop forever and there was never a avant-garde jazz, like, we just kept doing from the 40s into the 80s. It was just, there was no, anything else was too bizarre. And that would have been the death of an art form prior to when it did kind of die. So I think they're really just, there are people out there who can read work that we think can't be distributed and doesn't have any audience. I think finding a way to just say, let's let readers make the decision on this. I wish publishers would kind of cultivate things that they don't necessarily understand yet, just for the future, not just for the prestige of it or because it's the right thing to do, but because it'll be better for their business model 20 years later, not to just pigeonhole themselves to one kind of storytelling that they understand from the moment that they entered into things, but something that builds on that might seem too challenging to them. It might not be too challenging for their readers. So I just think that's an important, like with what the future is going to look like and the potential for these things. I think that's a big part of it.
You know,
So
that's a,
so go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
I was going to say it's a great point, Austin. And I actually think my focus has shifted or my perception has shifted on comic book stores in the last maybe 5 years. I've been interacting a little bit more with them. And I used to say comic book stores this, comic book stores that. And the truth is, they're completely different from one to another. They're entrepreneurial businesses, they're small businesses, and they're very, very different. And, you know, to your point, some of this work that may be more challenging, maybe avant-garde, may not make sense in a mostly diamond type store. There are stores that handle that material, you know, and that's
Yeah.
how some of these books get known and they do build audiences. And, you know, it may take time, but part of the beauty of this ecosystem, and quite honestly, why I think comic book stores continue to thrive. I just got, as I mentioned, I just got back from Comics Pro last week. It was the most positive room of retailers I've ever seen. I've done Comics Pros in the past.
Yep.
It was incredible. And I mean, comic book retailers, again, I'm saying, you know, we shouldn't stereotype, but they can be a cantankerous kind of, you know, we all know the Simpsons comic book shop guy. That's not what I see anymore. And more, these stores are completely different. Their ordering systems are different. I heard all about metadata this past couple of days, something that I never think about when I'm self-publishing. But then I hear from stores that are ordering Power Pulp and are doing things completely different. So I think that's one thing for all of us to keep in mind is that, like, yeah, you know, it'd be great if all the comic book stores ordered all the books we love. But it's awesome that they aren't the same because that means some of those stores will order the books we love or the creators that we love who maybe are having small print runs and self-publishing and doing stuff that we might not find at, you know, Barnes and Noble, but we will find at some comic book stores. So
Yeah.
I'm encouraged by that. And I think the other thing that hasn't come up yet tonight, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, there are more people making comics today than at any point in history by a wide margin. And I think part of the result of that is now we have 25 types of distribution. And in 5 years, maybe we'll have 250 kinds of distribution models. And part of it is to accommodate an unprecedented number of creators. You know, it's a shame that many of these creators get lost, and it's a struggle, as Chris said, to try to connect this book to a receptive audience because I believe that audience is out there. I think, you know, it's not just a bigger number of creators, but also a bigger number of creators creating work at a very high level in all genres, in every direction you can think of. And it's overwhelming for everybody. You know, imagine, Austin, I've known you for 25 years, I think. We would have,
Yes.
if we'd have made a
I
top
met through
10
Dylan.
list. Yes, yeah. If we'd have made a top 10 list in, you know, 2000, we'd have had 8 of the same names in that top 10 list. If the 5 of us made a top 10 list now, we might not have one name in common. I would bet we would not have one name in common across the 5
Yeah.
of us for best book that came out last year. And I think that's healthy, but it is a strange thing to adjust to. When I found comic book stores, what I found were my people. I could go into almost any comic book store and have a conversation about, you know, all these books. And now I would walk in there and pull off almost any book, and the chances that another person was in that store that read that book, it's not a great chance. You know, there's just so much out there. So, you know, I think we're trying to adjust to a lot of change. You talk about incremental change, but I don't think it's incremental. I think it's massive, and I think it's massive in a few different areas. And so
Yeah.
I'm encouraged by where we're at. I think this is kind of a golden age of comics in a lot of ways, but it doesn't mean there aren't growing pains. You know, there's a lot to work out, and I'm excited when I see a new distribution model because to me, it's trying to solve a problem. It's not going to solve all the problems, but you know, we've got a lot more solutions now than we did 20 years ago.
Well, I'm encouraged that you said that Comics Pro was very positive because I think again, like talking about that bookstore model, it's like a specialty store for this medium. I think that's, I mean, how that's so great. Like the idea that, I think the idea of getting comics into bookstores thinks of comics as a novelistic art form, which is true to an extent, but not exactly true. It is its own thing. So I don't know if this is just hype, but those absolute books, I'm glad they're doing well. And one thing I gotta say is like with my students, for years it seems like they haven't been reading any Western genre comics at all. But now it seems like it's just all been made. Like that seems to be all they when they're talking before class, or I let them present on work that they're into, and it's always mega. This year, they're these younger readers are reading those. They're legitimately reading those absolute books. I hope
Yeah.
that makes comic book stores survive, because I still think for what we're all trying to do, that if that goes away, or if the direct market in whatever form goes away, what a tragic thing to lose. I should say though that that the Cantankerous, I just have a funny comic book store story that maybe you guys would to present the other side. I was with a friend a couple years ago. We went out to like Long Island to go to back issue stores. I had a list of stuff I was looking for, and we went into the store, and before we could even ask anything, the retailer's just talking about how badly everything is going. He can't make his rent. Nobody's coming in to buy stuff. He's just going on and on. Of course, I can sympathize. And then I say, well, I've got this list. Do you have any of this stuff? And he just goes, no, it's in the back. I'm too depressed to go in there. And so I think that's such a reality. I mean, I loved it. I thought that was so funny. Like, because it is sort of like there is something about comic book store retailers. It's such a bizarre, like some of them, it's such a fan, like there are so many fans that open stores and they kind of run it in this like non-business way. It's such a specific kind of retail environment. So, but I mean, that reality, if you go into a place and they don't even they can't pay the rent, but they don't want to go in because they don't want to go into the back because they're too depressed. I mean, it's not all smooth sailing with getting interesting material into comic book stores. So with my advocacy enthusiasm, I should also cite that example of
Let me give you all
the
two
nightmare vision of a store.
Let me give you all two antidotes to that anecdote there. To two ideal, I'm imagining the ideal experiences as you all are discussing your ideals. Best shop I've been to in Minnesota so far, I moved here three years ago, is a place called Odd Mart.
The best.
Great.
Yeah, just absolutely fantastic shop. And what is it? It is a sticker shop. It's what, like a skate shop, kind of?
They don't even say they're a comic shop.
No, absolutely not. It's cool stuff. It's neato stuff, like it's like if you can imagine the intersection of like Big Daddy Roth and the 60s undergrounds and I mean they have everything. It's a wonderful place, right? And they sell tons of our smudge manga. And why? Because the people behind the counter have read them and love them, and they have an easy hook. Right, so you just hold the cover up and you tell the name of the title and they're ready to go. So that to me, like that's an example of this kind of like, is it a comic shop? Is it a book shop? Is it a sticker shop?
Right.
Who knows? Right? This
is a box. This is a box of stuff going out to Odd Mart tomorrow. They just placed an order to Domino, so that's perfect. That's a perfect example. And they got a beautiful array of stuff here.
Beautiful.
And
oh, go ahead.
Sean, before you do number two, I'll say the coolest shop I've been to here in Alabama is in Birmingham, Alabama. It's called Sanctum Tattoos. It's a tattoo shop, and up front is a legit like full Fantagraphics, like all the cool stuff that like I want to walk into a shop and like Austin said, be like, I've never heard of this before, and a bunch of local stuff. It doesn't say comics anywhere. It's Sanctum Tattoos.
That's right. So this is somewhere even further afield than that. Carson, I told you before about Kristen Scholl, who I met at SPX a couple years ago. She is a self-published artist who mostly makes diary comics, but also makes a shared world kind of fantasy comic. And I was talking to her about this comic, and she told me the amount that she has hand sold, and I was like incredulous. And I said, "Where did you sell these?" And she said, "I really like Ren fairs. So my friends and I go to the Ren Fair, and we'll sell our fantasy comic." I was like, "Of course you do!" Like, she's smart, she's friendly, she's got a great comic. Like, and she's at a Ren Fair, which is the natural audience for her particular comic. This is the types of stuff that, like, I think is, the hopeful. When I'm hopeful, when I'm Jim, this is what I imagine is the world in which people can print on their photocopy, or on their brother laser printer, and then bring them to the Ren Fair. So
I was in Minneapolis and did back-to-back weekend shows. One was a Minneapolis a comic show, and I absolutely tanked. The next week, a friend asked me if I wanted to take a corner of his table at a horror convention, and I did better at that show than I've probably done at any show ever. So yeah, you just have to kind of think outside of the box on those things too. I was also at Comics Pro with Jim, and I do have to also say that the selling of the success of something like Absolute Batman, I probably talked to like 200 different retailers this weekend. My voice was very much fried by the end of it, but they were all really receptive to what we were doing and very excited that that our distribution model exists. And the success of something like Absolute Batman gives them a little bit of extra cash to be able to take
Mm,
risks on things like us. And
yeah.
so,
Yeah.
it was a really great weekend to just kind of press the flesh with the people who are selling your stuff and getting it out there. And they're very positive right now, and it's a good time to be a new distributor. I hope and I feel like we'll see if the orders start coming in, but yeah.
I find all of you to be incredibly inspirational, and it was very meaningful to me that you all would connect for this conversation. I think it's a tribute to how wonderful our medium is, and really how wonderful our industry is. That all of us, thoroughly disparate in so many different ways, can come together on things that we have gotten so much like love and identity and sense of self from. And
Yeah.
Jim, I've spent a long time the past couple months watching some of your videos from a couple years ago, and it's been very meaningful to me to hear those conversations that you were able to have with pros who won't be with us forever, and you've helped crystallize those things. So I know anyway. I want to thank you for that too.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for including me tonight. This has been really fantastic. A word that hasn't come up yet is community.
Hmm.
That's something that really was an unintended consequence, I guess, of cartoonist kayfabe. It wasn't something that Ed and I had really planned ahead of time, but that community turned out to be the best part of it. And I feel like this conversation that we're all having, it's an extension of that community. The conversations we had at Comics Pro, comics have, I think, always sort of been this community, even though it's sort of made up of loners and people that felt alone. As we found comic book stores, as we found comics that kind of connected with us, I do think community's always been a big part of it. And it may speak to why this community's growing when a lot of other places are going away, I think comics aren't. And I think part of that is it's a way to connect with each other. We're facing everybody, AI is all I hear about. It seems like everywhere I go. And I feel like comics are this pure expression that is from my brain as near as I can possibly, using words and pictures, sort of translate something and give it to you, to transmit it. It's a very human thing. And I think that community might be stronger now than ever. And maybe the need for
Yeah.
that community is stronger than ever. And that may speak to some of the reason so many people are making comics and so many people are looking for comics and reading comics.
One of the most beautiful things during the pandemic was when you guys would do the mailbag on KFAB. And that to me is like that speaks to, a lot of those people you didn't they were just selling their stuff blindly and they loved what you guys were doing and you would show their work and I would order people's work and I'm still a fan of people that as worse as I am in this stuff, I found people from a slightly different corner that you guys would stand stuff to. And that was such a beautiful illustration of a kind of distribution where it's like this person made it. They made it. Most of the stuff you have in that mailbag was made by hand. A lot of it wasn't professionally printed. They made it. They sent it to you guys. You guys showed it. People ordered it, and that was just such I mean, that is it's so it is so easy to get this stuff out there. If there, I think what I really I think what you guys were doing with that channel was you had it was so clear how much you cared about things, and people trusted what you were saying. And I don't know if you loved all the stuff you were showing on the mailbag or not, but you cared for it, whether it wasn't your kind of thing or not. And just to have a platform that's owned by us, the people who make this stuff and do these things, I think people are I think readers are looking for something. They're always looking for something like that. They're always, I think comic book creators are always looking for things that they don't know about and that will challenge. They want a holistic view of the medium, and so I thought what you guys were doing that was just perfect. And I imagine it got too complicated because I imagine too many people were sending stuff. But that just shows the need for it, for there to
Yeah.
be. I mean, I wish the way everything's become uncentralized, there's so many different outlets, so there can't be one hub. But for people making fringe material, I do wish there was something that was like that moment where lots of people were watching your guys' channel because you built it into this thing, and then you were able to plug in work that like not necessarily non-commercial work, but very fringe work, and just show it to people and let them make their minds up. And a lot of times people will just. You guys did something on Domino and kayfabe, and I would imagine that a lot of the kayfabe listeners have different perspectives on the medium, but people ordered a ton of stuff from Domino and remains customers just from getting the chance to see it. So I think that's there's so much potential. Just I mean, comics are so easy to ship. They're if you do a little bit of work, you're not going to damage them. They're easy to print. They're easy to get out there, and so just having a hub to talk about things is like if that was as beneficial as it was, I think we can. There's so many things we can build in that direction.
Look, if anybody is thinking about being a self-publisher and has made it this far, go buy yourself a laser printer. Okay, you can thank me later. You need a one color Brother laser printer. There's all types of things you can do with that thing, and you can make your comics for almost nothing. It really is still an extraordinary tool, and get out there and get them.
It's true.
Absolutely.
It's funny. I've noticed that sometimes, like people, I've noticed younger cartoonists are like doing Rizo for black and white comics. That's something I never thought I'd, because I just don't think they use Xerox, or like Xerox machines aren't as plentiful as they used to be. So they're like, well, how do I print this black and white comic? I guess everybody does their things on Rizo. But I've had people argue that black and white printing with a Rizo is cheaper than photocopies. I really don't think that's true, but maybe. I mean, maybe I just don't know.
It's worth the material clout.
Yeah.
Well, Carson, thanks for being our host for this. I don't know exactly how I was imagining we're going to navigate it, but of course everyone has so much to contribute. I feel like we could have gone on many hours, but alas, my ninja children await behind me.
And if you've watched the channel at all, you know that Sean's ninja children are fierce and they may crawl over him like monkeys in about 3 seconds. So we should let him go to drive safely with that gigantic mound of snow behind him. Yeah, look at that.
Little parking lot snow for you.
Yeah, but thank you guys all for joining. It's been fun to do this again. It's been too long since me and Sean got together, and it's a pleasure to talk to all you and a real honor. And thank you guys for doing that because I'm just a buyer, a consumer. I make a book every now and then, and you guys are the guys that do the work that allows me to get my book out when it happens and find all of this other stuff that I have found. And to me, it is. I think people who are into comics in large are into the medium, and it's not as hard to get them to like link one thing to the other because it's all comics in the end. And then the spread that we've got here is beautiful. So I really appreciate you guys showing up and representing.
Yeah,
I don't
thank
want
you.
Carson to get off that easy saying that he's just like, I just had to, and Jim knows about this, but I just had to put together a list of my 150 favorite comics, and there was there's a pretty prominent book that Carson worked on my list, so I can't let him talk himself down that way.
Well, I said I put something out every now and then, but mostly I'm just buying stuff. And that was
Well,
someone
when you
else's.
put something out, it's best of the best. So I think
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Much appreciated. But
Thanks,
yeah,
guys.
yeah. We had a great ending.
God dang it, Austin.
Oh, sorry.
You had to
I'll-
compliment Carson and ruin the ending of the
I'll
call.
take the compliment and edit it out and just go.
Okay.
Austin likes my
No,
books. Yay.
no. The compliment goes the stinger at the beginning, and then a little bit
Uh,
of.
Oh no. That was basically silly. Just forget I
J-
said it. I should have just said it.
no.
Jim,
That's I much appreciate it.
Jim, I'm going to send you a cut that's just you, and you can do what you want with that. That's probably going to be the better.
Oh, jeez. I'll play it for my wife. I'm still trying to win her over on comics being a good thing.
After all this time, you're not going to win that. She's like, I've lost so much of hours with you to
Yeah.
this thing. You're never going to win me over.
Maybe
All
she'll
right,
win
hey.
you over, Jim. Maybe,
This might be my last appearance.
Yeah.
I've got to run, guys. Thanks so much for
Okay.
doing this. I really appreciate
Yeah.
it. We'll coordinate on the other details later, but really, really meaningful to me. I really appreciate you guys making the time for this. So,
Yeah, this was
course.
fantastic, and I'm
Yeah.
so happy to see
Real
all
pleasure.
of you. So
wonderful.
be well, everybody.
Yep.
Yeah,
Take
see you
care.
soon.
Too, Jim.
Take care.
Take care, guys.
All right.
Bye bye.
Bye, you guys.
Bye.